Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Just assume it's normal here.
Does one of you want to pull up the stream? And I'll. Yeah.
Do either of you know if the blade of this sword is pattern welded? Because Oakeshott, when he writes about it, is kind of unclear.
It sure looks like it.
I should have. Yeah, I think the thing is, he has like several theories that then he debunks in sequence about the sword. And so I got a little
sorry.
mixed
I was
up.
thinking about the Viking blade.
No.
I don't know about this one. I don't
Maybe when
think
Chris comes
so.
back. Because he originally said, when you're reading through it, that the blade he thinks was made in like the 830s.
Can you sit in the chair and just continue talking?
Yeah. Was made in the 830s because he said it was pattern welded, but then later he says everything I just said was wrong. I don't know. So
Yeah.
I was.
It's a hard
I'll,
style, but you
yeah.
research it.
I'll ask Chris.
Right, what time is it?
You said it was 5282.
It is 2:55.
5-2. Okay. I'm gonna give you a scale. What are these?
Let me go.
Celia, do you just come back here for work? Is that
I came back here for the holidays.
okay?
I'm working remote basically for a few weeks.
Fortunate time.
I know. Two of the best fortune timing was I bought tickets and then learned Jess Finley was coming, so I got to go to Jess Finley's on the land.
Brandon, you might know. Is the blade of this sword pattern?
No.
Okay.
This is, at this point, you could get Crucible.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I was reading in A Sword in Hand, and Oakeshott kind of went back and forth. At one point, he thought it was pattern welded.
So, you, from certain, okay, if it is pattern welded, it's not a pattern I recognize. It's a little splotchy looking,
Yeah.
but I think that's because of just moisture.
Yeah. Well, and he
getting-
also said that the blade is corroded so much
So,
the skin.
you, from certain, and it's very, very thin. If it is pattern welded blades don't tend to be this thin. Because they're so
Flashy.
steel, when steel gets better, because you can make it like it's that thin, just moisture.
Well, and he also said that the blade is corroded so much
So,
the skin.
you, from certain, and it's very, very thin. If it is pattern welded blades don't tend to be this thin. Because they're so
Flashy.
steel, when steel gets better, because you can make it like it's that thin,
Brandon's protege might know these.
Oh, the blade is corroded so much the
and
skin.
it's very, very thin. If it is pattern welded blades don't tend to be this thin. Because they're so
Flashy.
steel, when steel gets better, because you can make it like it's that thin.
Brandon's protege might know these.
Oh, the blade is corroded so much the skin.
It's very, very thin. If it is pattern welded blades don't tend to be this thin. Because they're so steel, when steel gets better, because you can make it like it's that thin.
Brandon's protege might know these.
Oh, the blade is
It's very, very thin. If it is pattern welded blades don't tend to be this thin. Steel, when steel gets better,
Brandon's protege might know these. Brandon's protege might know these.
my hat to shame.
For a wipeout on the stairs.
there's the thing I did about killing.
Seriously, really? So much longer,
Almost,
floofier.
my feet went out, I was starting to go sit down, falling on my face on those steps, I started to run. When I got to the bottom, I was running full speed like this before I put my knee.
Oh, Chris, I'm so sorry.
But, all I did was pull a hamstring a little bit. You doing one of those? Or one you do? Which one do you?
I'm doing the touch safely, one that's required.
To get a couple.
It'll be in the, yeah, third one.
Fresh face.
Hello, buddy.
College.
Hello.
Right.
That will teach kids.
How was that small alcoholic answer?
What, may already be out? Is it already out?
Let's see.
No.
It is not out, I don't think.
Did not think it was really
And we try. Ah, super, let me grab a glove.
Well, for now, you can take the scabbard and put it over there. We'll all be passing our gloves back and forth.
It's a real nice one. God, the scabbard is so well preserved too, look at that. Oh, I didn't see this. Oh, yeah, man, look at that. See the, yeah. It's almost like sturgeon motifs there, maybe? So this is probably sturgeon hide. Gosh, what is it?
Yeah.
What a beautiful blade.
Mhm.
You know,
Makes me thrilled.
So you remember how it was,
You wanted to go earlier.
talking about, I was curious
So
about whether or
what I'm
not
thinking
there were
is-
silvered
A decent start would
guards.
be
Or wait, no, I was talking with Nathan about that
give
last
Chris an
night.
opportunity to.
How
do
scabbard
one
for this one
first.
has silver again.
Then we
I
go
do
you.
go by.
There's traces
I
of
don't
silver.
care.
But I
There's
also
some
like
pictures of
that
silver
you can be
fittings
like the in and out in terms
Okay,
of
I'll do-
the experts.
I'll do-
MC.
I'll do Hinkle first,
So
and
it's
then
all
I'll do
silver.
the blade last,
Yeah,
or
that
vice
should be
versa.
That's
Okay, so we'll go you first
So,
for the Hinkle. You
for
can do
the
rest.
light,
You had a
there's a good chance that this would have been
3:30.
silvers.
Leo,
Cleaned it
do you
to
have
the-
time
to the
limit?
silver. I'll
No.
have to change.
Chris, did you hear Nathan's plan to go to Henkel's at the mall
So why don't we do
and bring the sword and
you
say,
and Parker, and then Amanda.
I wonder if it's
Yeah,
the same
and
thing.
then
I was really curious, I was
yeah,
doing
no,
this.
actually.
Dale,
Peter Hinkle, right?
Brandon.
He was just,
Brandon,
I
do
forget if he was
time
Solingen or.
I'd like to leave
You may have been.
early-ish,
Okay.
so I'll get too sick.
So why don't we do,
Well, if I'm gonna talk about
after
that one, I
Parker, we
suppose I
can do
should,
you, then Leo, then Amanda, then me,
Ready to
then
go?
Dale, and then Chris again.
Which sword are you gonna pick? Henkel's?
I'll do, first I'll do Hinkle, then I'm gonna
That's
talk
everyone's
about.
favorite, isn't it?
Well, and
That's
then I'll
really
do
nice.
this just because it's a Solingen bladesmith making very different
Yeah.
blades that wound up in different parts of the world, and they were all made within a period of a few months of each other.
Yep,
The blades, not the
is it?
tips.
Are we live?
Isn't it amazing how we
Alright,
can all
did you
bring
bring
it
us
back
live?
together?
Well,
Cause it was,
I thought so.
I did the
Okay.
audio test and we were live there.
what city
Okay.
is Peter Hinkle?
Okay.
We
Just
should
making
look
sure.
up
Yeah.
that, Brandon,
It's
the,
starting soon.
brought this
Okay,
slide in, but
cool.
the Patterson, or Peterson 75, the non.
My brain is
one,
weird.
also Solingen. US Army contracted with Solingen to make them blades in the, during
Well,
the war.
they were making a lot of blades for a lot of folks for a while.
Yeah.
They're really nice.
So this is one where someone had the, either they wanted to be fancy or they really wanted a nice sword and they decided to go Solomon. That's awesome.
Hey, we should let's grab the Tiffany's. You
Yes.
wanna, would that help, with your discussion, Dale?
So my discussion could get real broad, so I'm gonna try and keep it to just these two, cause,
You are still gonna use mine or?
I might come
Really
to
on a
it for
roll
just a
today,
second,
Parker.
just to say,
Oh, yeah, wrong sword?
Yeah, long sword, talk about crossbows.
We all shut our phones off, right?
You don't have to, really.
Well,
Shut my house up.
just the sound.
Okay, Chris, are you ready? Okay, so I'm gonna just, be here in the chair quick and start the introduction, and then I'll give you that chair.
I have, you don't have to rush for my sake though. I need to leave at around 5.
okay.
I'm gonna get set, and then when you're ready, Dale, you can get the audio.
You gonna introduce me or shall I
Those are
introduce
nice.
myself?
What's that?
I'll introduce myself or are you gonna introduce me?
I can introduce you, but you can certainly, I'll probably just ask you to say that it's not your history
Yeah.
review.
Very.
You can give us as much as.
Well, I'll try to, since the whole thing's supposed to be 5 or 6 minutes.
So 5 or 6 is sort of the
Well,
low
it's
line,
extra.
I'm expecting everybody's
Yeah,
gonna be
well,
able to
what it
say
is,
it's not longer,
They
so
just put it out.
use as much time as you want.
Should be, should be.
Do you want me to walk in or just sit in the chair while you're introducing?
So I'll sit in the chair and introduce, and then I will motion you in and give you the chair, and then I'll do it.
Okay.
Give me a good cleaning.
Give a good cleaning.
Okay.
Any letter.
how much
Yep.
adjustment's going on.
Okay.
All right, and where's the camera?
It's right there.
There, and this point.
Yep.
And then, get up.
Yeah, so I think we can have people who aren't on camera just assist us.
Okay.
Yep.
And where's the camera?
It's right there.
There, and this point.
Yep.
Where's the camera?
There, and this point.
Okay, we're good. So I think we can have people who aren't on camera just assist us. So again, well, I'm gonna say then welcome to the Yuletide stream.
There, and this point.
Where's the camera?
There, and this point. There, and this point.
So I think we, well, I'm gonna say then welcome to the Yuletide stream. So again, well, I'm gonna say then welcome to
Where's the camera?
There, and this point.
Where's the camera?
There, and this point.
So I think we, well, I'm gonna say then so again, well, I'm gonna say then welcome to the Yuletide stream.
There, and this point.
Where's the camera?
There, and this point. There, and this point.
So I think we, well, I'm gonna say then welcome to the Yuletide stream.
There, and this point.
I'm gonna say then welcome to
Where's the camera?
There, and this point.
Where's the camera?
There, and this point. There, and this point.
So I think we, well, I'm gonna say then welcome to the Yuletide stream. So again, well, I'm gonna say then welcome to the Yuletide stream.
There, and this point.
Where's the camera?
There, and this point. There, and this point.
Someone slashes at you, which is what happened here, their blade struck the grip. So rather than getting your hip slashed, the grip of the sword took the blow. So it's not usual that you find this kind of damage on a sword. Often the grips get replaced if they're damaged.
Can we cut for a second? The audio is very staticky at the moment.
Do it over.
Okay.
Might need to.
Wait just a sec. Okay.
God, I didn't know that about the sword.
Did
Makes
you?
total sense. I didn't know that. But
It's one of the coolest things.
How are you
It's quick.
I just opened it up.
So I think what happened is,
Okay.
I keep on meaning to talk about, I think it was one, like that.
Well,
Is what
I
passed.
think it's hidden skate.
yeah, see if,
Well, I don't know. I think you're wrong. I think if it was a skate, it would have taken a chip with it. I think it's hit. Because look at the depth. The depth is virtually identical on those two cuts.
yeah.
Can you guys
A
check
hit
that
and a
audio?
skate is.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, it's like, how are you typing chat before? Okay,
No,
yeah, you
it's
wanna manage chat on that
angle,
side.
And if it's here and someone's striking at me from behind, this is not front load.
Actually-
You're striking at me from behind, that's just what you're gonna hit me.
unless it was like
Oh, I just
taking
turned
his
off
belt
the-
off and he's super drunk after hunting and then falls down the
I
stairs.
think it's good.
So are we doing the whole thing over?
Give
yeah.
1 second. So
You
Yeah,
want me to
let's-
walk your introduction as well?
maybe we'll just
Yeah,
try this again here quick.
All right.
You're good to stay though. Okay. That's fine on camera. I just wanted to make sure we're good on audio.
Are we good on audio?
I think so. So,
Can you hear us?
hello, chat. Is the audio still buggered? We'll give you a second.
Somebody's watching this off and.
Yeah.
letting us know.
Yep.
And it's mine. You know, luckily, some of these aren't even Oakeshott. Some of the more interesting ones happen to be mine, which is a very nice little thing.
How many do you have to?
Well, all the bronze except the one, all the rapiers except the one. Most of the Near Eastern stuff, all of the Near Eastern stuff except the last 4 or 5 that were donated, those are all mine. All the Indo-Persian stuff is mine. I mean, I'll make it part of the collection, but it's things that I bought. Is it working?
Are we all right?
I've yet to see anything from anybody, but
Okay,
I don't-
keep talking. I'm just gonna do a quick audio check.
We should
All
actually,
right.
we should catalog all of the stuff.
There is a secondary catalog.
Well, I've got all my stuff in there too.
Yeah, I know.
So we should actually go
That's
through and.
also written down whose is what.
Oh, good.
But we could update it because there's been more things in.
Yeah, cause I got a couple things from Rick Fay that we didn't actually
Yes, some
catalog.
Filipino stuff.
Which is, it would be.
Well, and the 2 that were just donated, and then the one you're gonna talk about that we bought.
Yeah, it's on, that's the one I donated, so.
And then these.
No, and then this one is,
Yep.
yeah, the one you donated, the, little Yagaton.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool.
That is a very cool one.
Well, looking at it, until you look close, you would never give it that kind of an important provenance.
Nope, until you read that it.
And then once you cleaned it a little, and all the gold turned up.
Yeah, so he took toothpaste on it and just like, bing. I mean, you should see it now, it like glitters.
Yeah.
So.
Chris, can you sit in the chair when you're right in front of the mic and talk a bit?
I'm talking. Is it working? Now, maybe when I stood up, that was part of why it went funny.
Could be. It's a pretty big mic though, I don't know.
It is a good mic. It was like a professional mic. When my son was like doing his teaching at Madison and they had to do Zoom stuff for COVID, they bought him this mic so he could do a Zoom class for 200. How's it working? Test, test, test.
it seems that the audio is fixed. I'm just adjusting the levels.
I could
So-
speak in a lower tone.
Yeah, that's what we need.
Is it better now? How's this? Well,
Or
hello
baritone.
everyone.
Okay. All right.
I think we should be good.
Okay. Take 2. Do you want to do the introduction? We'll start from the top.
Sure, stay in the chair.
Okay.
Okay.
And what do you want for Christmas? A sword.
I would take
Here, have a knee.
Okay.
That'd be too silly.
Hello, Internet.
Waka waka.
So I would like a sword for Christmas, and fortunately, we're going to be talking about swords today, aren't we, Mr. Poor?
You are a lucky man. Now get off my lap.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the Yuletide stream.
No one can accuse us of being droll. Well, my name is Chris Poor. For those of you that heard our take 1, you know who I am. But for those who didn't, we'll start over. In the late 80s, I founded what became the Oakeshott Institute with my friend Ewart Oakeshott. I met him when I was just knocking on his door to look at his collection, and he was really gracious. And 5 years later, we set up a trust where the whole thing is here. So we're going to be talking about some of the pieces that are in the collection and some of the pieces that are ancillary to the collection. And what I'm going to talk about right now is a early 17th century hanger. Now, what we mean by hanger is it's usually a single-edged sword. It was worn, hung in a baldric on your side, which is why they're called hangers. This is a very high-quality blade. It has multiple fullers. It has its signature of a known maker, Peter Henkel, who is a German maker, and it's inlaid in gold, which only went into relatively high-end blades. It's got a stout back edge, but a very thin, sharp false edge, which in this case isn't actually a false edge. You might be able to see it's less than 1 millimeter thick. Now I can flex this sword because I own this sword. This one happens to be mine. I wouldn't do this with Oakeshott swords, but since I own it, Nobody suffers but me if it goes wrong, so I'm gonna show you the flex. I'm doing very, very little pressure, and I'm getting a really nice flex. So this is an incredibly light, fast weapon. It also is perfectly capable of being a military weapon. The English Civil War saw a lot of people using light hangers like this. The hilt is chiseled steel, or probably rather chiseled iron. As you can see, chiseling means they've taken a chisel and actually carved detail into it. Now hopefully that's visible. If not, we'll put a few pictures up
Yeah,
later.
we can do a close-up in a second.
Yeah. What's really interesting to me about this sword is it has battle damage that wasn't repaired or replaced. The grip on this is staghorn. It's an antler. And I'm going to stand up just so you can see. These swords are worn in a scabbard on a baldric that goes across your shoulder. So my theory, and I'm pretty confident about it, is whether in an ambush or in a battle, someone struck this sword, probably either coming from behind or from that direction with another sword, because there are two parallel deep cuts that would be exactly right when the sword worn at this angle, cut into the hilt. And again, we'll do a close-up a little bit later. So it's very unusual that you find a hilt with blade damage. The edge has also got quite a few little nicks and cuts. So this sword was well used, and it's actually been sharpened down a little bit. But for a sword from the first quarter of the 17th century, it's actually quite an interesting little piece of history, especially, again, showing signs of battle. So there it is. I don't know if anybody's listening and has any questions, because if you are, I'm happy to answer them.
No questions yet, but maybe you could talk, Chris, about the Oakeshott Institute as a whole and what the swords are doing
Sure.
in one collection.
Okay.
And I also just want to toss out a suggestion. Maybe we take questions and we all go through our individual pieces, and then we come back to the questions about our pieces at the end.
Okay.
Just because there's the delay between our talking and the live stream.
Fair enough.
And we may move on to someone else's
Okay,
piece.
so questions at the end after we all speak.
Yeah, but feel free to ask about the hanger.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a really brief background of the Oakeshott Institute. Literally, I rang his doorbell, had a letter of introduction, sort of, and went in and met he and his wife, and they let us stay for about a half an hour, looked at swords and left. The next year I went back and I got to stay for a couple of hours. The year after that I got to stay for a few days, and the year after that I had my own room. So it became a good friendship, a rather unusual one. He was in his 80s, I was in my 30s, but he was an incredibly generous guy, a classic English gentleman, and he lived in a great 17th century house where every room was slathered with swords, sort of 1,500 years of history on the walls. And a good friend of mine who I met the same trip was David Edge from the Wallace collection. And by the end of this process, literally the three of us were there for New Year's, sitting in the study with snow and church bells and brandies, talking about what a pity, you know, you were pretty old, he was worried his kids might just sell the collection for the money. David Edge said, well, the Wallace can't take them, we're a static collection, I wish we could. So I put my hand up and said, what about me? I would set up a trust because I own Arms and Armor, so we had some resources. I thought it would never happen, but I got a call about a month later. He said, well, my boy, you're the one. So vast amounts of money in legal fees later, we did in fact set up this trust where all 100 some odd pieces from his collection came to this country, and under the Oakeshott Institute auspices, our whole point with it is to allow hands-on. So you can come, you can look at these swords, you can handle these swords, you can photograph them, you can measure them. We are an educational resource. Unlike museums that won't let you touch anymore, because when I was young, I actually tried on the armor at the MIA. And the Met said, here's a closet, you know, with 500 Gothic maces in it, here's some gloves, don't break anything. That doesn't happen anymore, but it does happen here. So, if you're interested in more information about that, shoot us a line. We're happy to share with you.
Cool.
All right. So
Okay.
No other questions, but if you would like to hand off to Parker next.
Parker,
Parker's up. He's gonna tell you some more interesting things.
I don't know if I can top that. That's putting the bar pretty high.
Go ahead and grab your sword.
Sounds good. I'm gonna grab, hello everybody. I'll do a better introduction here. Aha, I've been sabered. So I am, what's that? Sorry. I am, Dr. Parker Cook. I am a research fellow at the Oakeshott Institute, and I specialize in overseeing our Islamicate, Eastern European, and by and large non-Western collection. We have a pretty substantial collection of items from the Eastern Mediterranean, from a bit from North Africa, some substantial pieces from Oceania, particularly the Philippines, and from South Asia. And it's a pleasure to work with all of these excellent materials. I'm going to showcase today one of my favorite pieces from the collection. It's tough to pick a favorite piece to talk about, but this is also a recent acquisition, one that we haven't really had a chance to showcase.
Oh, it's brand new.
It is brand new.
Shown online.
Exactly. This is a Crimean Tatar saber that could have been in the provenance of Polish noblemen or Russians or even Ukrainians, Cossacks, probably from the 18th century or early 19th century. Before I unsheath it, I'll just talk a little bit about the hilt here. So the hilt is made out of ray skin with a bronze cap at the end, and it has a unique feature of this kind of J-shaped curve that actually is in the tang, the metal of the blade, and it allows for manipulation of the blade using your pinky and squeezing the blade to have it rock back and forth in your hand to optimize edge alignment when cutting, and also to rock your hand back and forth to affect a feint. It has many different kinds of uses, but swords were built this way with this in mind. It's a unique piece of this technology. I don't know the entirety of this, of the provenance of this piece. When we purchased this piece, we were told it was part of a larger Islamicate Eastern European collection. But it's a really excellent piece. These are some of my favorite swords. Aesthetically, they're very pleasing. And what's super cool is that they reflect kind of the origins of sabers. And I'll show you a little bit how that's the case here, pulling it out very carefully from the scabbard. So it has a nice watered steel blade.
You can actually bring that a little closer to the camera.
Over this way? Yeah, you all just
Like if you stand up.
Stand up, okay.
Bring it closer.
Like a foot.
Just because the way that you're angling it now is in darkness, and we
okay.
can't see the...
Well, it emanates sort of void from it. That's my favorite part of the blade.
Oh, okay.
How's this? A little bit closer?
Sure, I can raise it up so that we're looking a little bit
Do you
closer.
want me to scooch down?
No, you're fine.
So this, the blade here is pretty well curved. It has a substantial false edge, or a spear tip edge. In Turkish, this is called a yalman. There's a reason why it is a technical term in Turkish. It features several punctures in the blade itself, which indicates the maker of the sword, and definitely sets it apart from other kinds of blades. Tatar types of blades tend to have these punctures versus imitations. This was a prized possession if you could get one. Imitations might have something else.
And it's a little hard to see. Are those punctured all the way through the blade?
They're not punctured all the way through the blade. They're just incisions made within the blade itself.
Okay. Can I do something a little wild for a second?
Go ahead.
Will you move to the other side of the tripod?
Other side of the tripod.
I want to try it.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're doing this out with me here.
Because if you're here, and now as you angle the blade towards you,
Towards me.
so if you put the point back towards you, you're going to
okay.
get the light from above.
Okay.
Because we're not really seeing the pieces
So
terribly well.
Like this, maybe?
You angle it this way.
Yeah,
and
I want people
catch
to
the
see the
light.
pieces. Okay.
Yeah.
Happy to pause and then continue.
Okay. So I figured maybe if we do it this way, even though it's less convenient, it'll be easier to actually see the swords.
Yeah, I'm totally fine.
Okay.
There's a light there.
Oh yeah. I'll figure it out. Keep going.
Sure. What's very cool about this kind of sword is that it is a 18th century representation of very early sabers. When I I mean by that, sabers from Central Asia, from what is now Eastern Russia, Mongolia, sort of the borders of North Korea, that part of the world, Manchuria, the sort of birthplace of cavalry sabers. Even though this is an 18th century or even early 19th century example, really excellent example and well preserved, of a weapon made in that time period, the form it represents is actually really, really ancient. And we can see elements of this in comparing older examples of sabers, kind of like the original sabers from those earlier time periods. The fact that it's been able to, be in this good of condition, maintain an edge on the blade, is really fantastic. The shark skin, or the ray skin or sturgeon skin grip itself, that it's in such good condition, is also really excellent. So this is one of my favorite pieces in the collection. It handles incredibly, very nimble, light in the hand, but still is robust. It's really not that big of a piece. I'll say one more piece too before it looks like I need to move. So one of the ways in which this sword was used, really carefully, is as people would balance it on their arms while shooting a bow. So you have to imagine a bow in my left hand here, and this weapon balanced on my right shooting arm. So if you can imagine it, people actually would use this to shoot, and then afterwards take the sword balanced on their arm, swing down and cut. And part of the design, the limits on the hilt, the balance of the spine, aided in being able to do that kind of technique. So after you fire your shot as a bowman...
Can you show it again?
Sure, absolutely. And it's a little bit harder to do this one here, but so step a little bit back.
Just to your left.
Just to my left here. Yeah.
Perfect.
So you can imagine, so if I've got my bow here and I finished shooting, right, and the shot would take place with the thumb and the thumb grip shot. After firing my shot, I have the ability, if I need to, if I've got an opponent charging at me, or if I have, someone's on the ground trying to assault me, any number of combative instances, I can actually use this blade to do a cut from below, ascending right afterwards. And having the smaller quillins here, which are like barely protect the hand, if all, really they just keep the hand from sliding up onto the blade, and the nice spine allows me to perform that technique, which is one of the primary uses of these kinds of weapons, is the sidearm after firing a bow. So there you have it. Incredible Tatar saber, one of my favorites. So I don't want to let go of it. It's that nice. So I will pass it on to our next speaker here.
So we're going to adjust the camera again, hopefully now with better lighting. Parker, can you dummy quickly for us, just to see if we get better?
Absolutely. No, like if you'll go back and sit down in the chair.
Sure.
We just want to
See if we've got better lighting here now.
I am a good dummy, so more ways than one.
That's why we hired you.
Exactly.
Okay,
I'm the butt of all the jokes.
Nope. Back. And can you tilt just a bit? Okay, is that blinding?
It's not too bad. I've had worse.
Actually, I think if you can tilt it that way a bit too.
Am I being
Sorry,
interrogated?
that's wrong.
It wasn't me. It's not my Tesla.
Okay, Parker, can you hold that out in front of you just so the blade is visible to the camera?
Absolutely. You can see the shimmer.
What do you think?
You are the new number 6.
It's better than it was. This is the problem with being a sword museum and not an audio-video museum.
But that's what adds to our charm.
Yeah, no, it's something we're
Dear
improving.
listeners. God, look at this too. So the funny thing is that when interviewed, there were some Tatar saberists who they were asked, why do you have false edges on weapons? And they were like, and the assumption was, we use them for these nice false edge cuts, or we like do coup de jarnac and can strike people at their coup de jarnac from Persian literally means like the saddle strike or the saddle cut, right? French translated from a French translation from a Persian term originally. But their response was, we just wanted a spear point so we don't have to bring a spear and a sword when we go out on raids. It's completely pragmatic and it makes total sense. So it became a feature of sabers for literally thousands of years. So cool. All right. Thanks for having me. Here we go, Doc.
Okay.
Mr. Brandon. Okay, we do see your questions, and we will come back to them as we've gone through all the pieces, and then we'll revisit them. We'll make sure to get all of the questions about both Chris's and Parker's blades at the beginnings, since they're a little bit more restricted on time.
All right, hello, I'm Brandon Fote. I am on the board of directors at the Oakeshott Institute. I came on board with Oakeshott in '98, I believe, by accident when I was in graduate school. I just came into Arms and Armor and got put to work cataloging all of the things that we got from Ewart, pictures, things that he'd written, books, that sort of thing. And so I made the original database, and after a couple of years, I was invited onto the board, and I've been there ever since. Initially, I was in charge of education, so I did outreach and camps and things like that. And now I just go and talk about swords. So today, I have kind of an interesting little assortment to share with everyone. These are from the Oakeshott Institute collection. So these are things that belong to me that are part of the museum. So what I have is a brace of dueling epées. They're probably from the very early 19th century. When I purchased them, the antiquarian I bought them from was pretty sure that they were kind of mid 18th century, but I think they're just a little bit later than that, probably right around 1800, maybe as late as 1850. So these dueling epées are only designed for formal duels. Nobody would have ever carried one of these. They are useless actually for anything but fighting in a duel. We're going to wait for just a moment for the racket to calm down.
I don't think we're ignoring too much of it. You're good.
Okay, good. So what this is a really nice, fairly high status set of dueling swords from France. And if you were in the upper class, or in the, if you were aspiring to at least appear like you were in the upper class, you'd buy a brace of these and they'd stay in a box. And if you got into a duel, you would bring the box to the duel and let your opponent pick which sword they wanted, but they're completely identical. It's got a really lovely three-sided blade, which you still see with modern Olympic epées. So you see it's got two hollow ground sides here, and then one kind of wider hollow grind here, and it goes into a really vicious, sharp point. But there's no cutting edge at all. So this is really just a thrusting weapon, and it's quite rigid, right? It's not as flexible as modern epées are. Again, I can bend this because I bought it, and if it snaps, like Chris was mentioning earlier, I'm the only one who's going to cry. But you can see it's really designed to flex this direction. It doesn't want to flex this direction very much at all. And so this is really designed just for stabbing people. Now, interestingly enough, oftentimes when you see a dueling epée like this, they have kind of a large bowl-shaped bell, which is designed to protect the hand, and this really doesn't. The bell on these two weapons, or the bells, are actually put on improperly. Someone took these apart, probably to clean them, and then just didn't pay attention to how they were putting it back together. But these should be turned 90 degrees. So if I'm holding the weapon like this part should be right there, not off the side like this.
So is that an aesthetic problem or a functional problem, or both?
Well, there's a couple of things to think about. So first of all, when I've got a bell that's shaped like this, it doesn't protect my hand. And
that kind of suggests that this might be a little bit older. If you look at épée duels that started to happen kind of later in the 19th century, or I mean, you can actually go on YouTube and watch videos of duels in the 1950s and 60s where they're fencing with what look like basically Olympic épées, but they're sharp, and so they've got kind of a large bell, and that's because the primary target is the front arm, because people are really trying to not kill each other for the most part. This doesn't have very much protection for the hand at all, and so the assumption is that's probably not primary target. If we're fencing with these, we're probably going to try to kill each other, which suggests that it might be a little bit earlier rather than later. So the other thing that I brought with is a really pretty set of foils from about the same vintage, and you can actually see some similarities. This has, if I show it to you backwards, kind of a figure 8 shaped bell. It's basically the same shape as this. This is turned the proper direction, and this is not. But if this was turned 90 degrees, it would be just like this. I don't know how to do soft shoe. I shouldn't act like I do.
Everybody's been training us.
This week, and I wasn't good.
Okay. I think maybe we're back.
Okay, can you hear me?
Give it just a second for chat to catch up to us.
Okay.
Looks like it's back.
Go for it.
Okay.
Okay, well,
So, yeah.
just in case it didn't work when I was trying to explain it a moment ago, this is kind of an academic tool to teach you how to fence with one of these fairly safely. Interestingly enough, although this is
Do you want to sit down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
although this is fairly flexible, the foil that would be used to train you to use it is really not. These are really quite rigid. And I think one of the things that we find in modern fencing, in modern Olympic fencing, people have this, they have certain behaviors that come about because they're used to fencing with a blade that's quite soft and really flexes quite a lot. When you have a blade that flexes a lot, parries don't work as well. It's easy to kind of throw your point around someone's parry to make the parry not work. But if you're using an old foil like this, which is, this is fairly early 19th century foil, there is no give to this at all. When I was a boy, I fenced with brace these fairly regularly, and I got to tell you, it feels like getting hit with a hammer when you get hit with one of these things. There's absolutely no flex. It feels like someone's stepping on you with a very sharp high-heeled shoe. And so this would teach you to respect the blade a little bit more than you might think, right? You really don't want to get hit with these really at all. So again, these are early 19th century French. very posh dueling epes. Just to give you a little bit of detail on them, the furniture is bronze. You see this pretty well?
Yeah, you can get a little closer.
Okay. So the furniture is bronze, really, really beautiful. Some flowers on the middle part of it, and some acanthus leaves there. The grip itself, which is still in pretty good shape. Actually, it's better on the other one. I'll show you. The grip on this is shark skin. Very, very nice grade shark skin. It would have originally had wire wrap as well, very much like the foil does. If you look very closely, you can see there is wire wrapped around, and also underneath the leather there's cords, so this gives a really nice positive grip. In the recess here, there would have been a braided wire as well. You see these sharkskin grips a lot on sabers and sometimes on other types of blades in the 19th century and 18th century. It gives a really, really nice grip. So this is a nice, very expensive brace of dueling swords, French, early 19th century, very posh, just like those of us that work at the Oakeshott Institute. Okay. Thank you very much, and happy holidays.
Who's next?
Okay, I think Leo is up next.
Hello, I'm Leo Danersmith. I'm a fellow for the Oakeshott Institute, and I'm particularly fascinated with all things medieval, and so I'll be talking about a decidedly medieval sword today. This is a Oakeshott Type 10 arming sword from around the middle of the 11th century, and it's a sword meant to be used in one hand. It can thrust, it can cut. It has inlay of silver, and so it's an upper class weapon, perhaps a knightly weapon. The blade and pommel are original, but the cross and grip were added by a later 20th century collector. And so one thing that I think is particularly fascinating about this sword is the history of theories about its history. Because there's been several different ideas about where it came from and what it did, and I think they're fascinating in that they prove a little bit about wishful thinking, as well as just how research works over time. And so all of these are based off of the silver inlay on the blade. I don't know if you can see any of
So,
the
take it down a little bit.
down. Okay, is that better?
Yeah, I think actually with the raking light you can see the.
Yeah. So there's a plethora of symbols, and I'll get to all of them. And then there's more on the other side. But the collector who owned this sword before it became Oakeshott, he believed, based on these symbols, that it belonged to Archbishop Hubert of Canterbury, who was the chancellor for King John I of England, and excitingly, went on crusade with Richard the Lionheart and negotiated the peace between Richard the Lionheart and Saladin. And so that would be very spectacular, But Ewart, after coming into possession of the sword and more research being done about the nature of the inlay on the blade, this theory is almost certainly not true. One reason why is that the symbols on the blade, and again I'll talk about what they actually are, or almost certainly actually are of Byzantine Greek origin, not English or French, as Hubert would have had. He also went to Hubert's tomb and talked to the curator there because the tomb was opened in the 18th century. And they said that there was no sword found with Hubert in his tomb. He had like a silver bowl and a cross, but no sword. And also a major part of the argument is that this double conjoined cross, Dale, can you get that? It's right there.
Yeah, it's a little bit closer.
Because this is the crux of the speculation, really.
Yeah, I'm gonna, just a second, I will
Okay.
pass along a link to the model.
Well, regardless, it's two crosses next to each other and conjoined. So the arms of the crosses are linked together, and so are the bases. And this previous scholar believed that one of the crosses represented the Christians living in Jerusalem, and the other one represented Saladin. But this is a little far-fetched because there's no explanation of why Saladin would have or why they would have chosen to represent Saladin as another cross when he is a Muslim. And on top of this, we now, on more research again, know that this sword did not come from England, but came from a Norman tomb in southern Italy. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about Oakeshott's theory about where the sword actually came from and its history, which I think is very fascinating, even if not quite as spectacular as that it went on crusade. Okay. So, let's talk a little bit about the silver inlay on the blade. So there's several symbols. One of them represents the church door, and so this obviously has religious connotations and shows the faith of its owner. There are 4 columns on the sword, represented as just rectangular bars, and these represent the 4 apostles, the 4 winds, and the 4 corners of the earth, which is a part of Christian faith. And then there is 3 sunbursts, which are particularly Greek Byzantine iconography. And they represent God kind of shining his light into the world through the sun. Really fascinatingly, it's difficult to find on the blade because the blade is somewhat corroded because the scabbard decayed on it. But there is a hand pointing with 2 fingers, which represents the blessing or favor of God. And you can see a similar hand in the Bayeux Tapestry, actually, which is contemporaneous with this sword. And so it's a blessing on the sword and presumably its wielder. And then on the other side of the blade, there are 3 signs that you might think are flowers. They look a lot like flowers. And again, the previous owner thought they were flowers, but they are actually Byzantine Greek crosses because they have a slightly different style sometimes in drawing their crosses. And then we again come to this conjoined cross, which Oakeshott himself was very uncertain about what it meant for a long time. But again, more research comes out, or he just becomes aware of research that already is out. And the conjoined cross represents the very brief reunification of the Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic churches that took place in 1050. And so since I'm pretty sure it's the 8th century, though don't quote me on that, the Eastern and Western branches of the Catholic Church had been divided. One of them is, based in Constantinople or Istanbul and the Byzantine Empire, and the other owes allegiance to the Pope. But in the 11th century, Norman knights came from France to Italy, fighting as mercenaries for both the Pope and the Byzantine Empire. But as mercenaries often do, they decided if we're winning all the battles, why not we have all the stuff? And so they turned against...
Yeah, just a little
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. They turned against both the Pope and the Byzantine Emperor and conquered much of southern Italy. And so the Pope and the Byzantine Empire made an alliance against the Normans. The Holy Roman Empire was also involved to a lesser extent to try to drive the Norman knights out of southern Italy and get them out of there. And so this sword, to me, clearly belonged to somebody who was part of that Papal Byzantine alliance and was part of this movement against the Normans, as is signified by this double crosses, and supports the reunification of the church. But where it gets more interesting to me is, why would somebody be buried with a sword that was created specifically against them? And so my personal theory, because this sword was found in a Norman southern Italian grave, was that the owner of this sword perhaps fought at the Battle of Civitay, which was in 1053, where the Papal Byzantine armies were defeated by the Norman knights of southern Italy, and the Pope was captured, and he switched his allegiance to the Normans, which ended the unification of the church after 3 years. So it was a very short-lived unification. But my theory is perhaps the owner of this sword originally fought at the Battle of Civitay, or perhaps at another engagement around the same time, either died or lost their sword, and a Norman knight took it, and was like, this is a pretty cool sword, and I don't understand what this Greek stuff is on it, but whatever, it works, you know. And then either they were buried with it, or their son, or so on. So it's a really cool sword in of itself, but also the history, and then the history of all the different ideas around it is really interesting. So, yes. And next is Dr. Amanda Tim.
Do you need us to answer questions too, since we're still here? I don't want to take up Amanda's time, but in the interim, or we answer all questions at the end.
I mean, if you want to answer one.
Do we have any
about
questions?
your
I'm happy
saber.
to, yeah.
So there was specifically, I believe this question was about your saber.
Okay. Should I bring it out? Maybe?
Sure. So we talked about the punching in the blade.
Okay.
Is the blade more of a triangular cross section, and how stiff is it towards the tip of the blade itself?
That is an excellent question. It is a pretty stiff blade. It does not have a whole lot of flex to it, and it's hard to describe. It's both like hefty and light at the same time. I think that's testament to its construction. But what was the first part of the question? Sorry.
More about the shape of the cross section. If it's triangular, so I think actually what might be helpful is if you bring that up to the camera, we can show off the divots. So actually the punches in the sides. So if you bring it here.
So what I don't have with me, but this is readily available.
Yeah, right there.
This is all the meanings of these marks are all cataloged. So what tribe of the Crimean Tatars this would apply to, what clan, subclan, that's all documented pretty well, and we can find out that information for you and send it out. I don't have it offhand. I can't remember exactly which one this is, but there's a fairly extensive collection of all of these actually. So this is one where that this kind of sword was copied and it was highly prized, particularly in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Really great sidearm, particularly we talked earlier about defending oneself during travel. This is a really nice one to carry because it's so light and not cumbersome. But we know this one is, we are very, very highly, it's very highly likely that this one belonged and was made by Crimean Tatars themselves, because of this kind of blade ornamentation that is not found on Polish blades. So yeah, you can see that there, and here's a better view of the cross section. So it has a pretty substantial spine, which helps keep the edge, or can aid in keeping the edge sharp and keeping sharpness, particularly on long campaigns when you have to sharpen this yourself. This is not just a weapon you use for dueling and then you're finished with it. It would be a weapon you take out in raiding skirmishes, or I hate to say it, during slaving raids in particular. Unfortunately, Crimean Tatars had a monopoly on the slave trade in the Crimean Peninsula. So you can see it's like we have the spine here, and then it tapers out into the edge that way.
Cool.
That answers your question.
Yeah,
Thank you. I will pass off to Dr. Taylor.
Hello. Are we live?
Yep.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay, so nobody just sit in the chair. And
Okay. I'm gonna set it down here first.
Okay.
Okay. I'll just gracefully drape myself here in this fantastic chair. It's my favorite. Hi, my name is Amanda Taylor. I have my PhD from the University of Minnesota, and I'm here to talk to you about my favorite piece in the collection, and it's this beautiful piece here. We call this our Spanish rapier, and it has some amazing features that are really much more noticeable and much more viewable up close. So I can't help but recommend that you go and look at our Sketchfab model that Dale has made of the piece and really zoom in and see up close some of the things that I'm going to talk about. So first, some just high-level facts about the piece. So the rapier, as you can see here, is yay big, based on using myself as a size comparison. I'm almost 5'5", so you can kind of see about the size of the piece. One of the things that's really cool about this blade, and that is kind of common for this type of blade, is that it is a premier piece, and so on the blade itself, and I'll get a little bit closer so hopefully it's kind of visible, is we know where it was made. It's made in Toledo. This is one of the manufacturing sites that was, and actually continues to be, one of the most premier manufacturing sites for sword blades in the medieval and the early modern period. And this blade also tells us the date of its manufacture. So we know that this piece, and it also says the name of the manufacturer, the maker of the sword blade. We know it was made in 1610. One of the other pieces of information that's really interesting about this piece is the hilt. So this hilt is actually older than the blade. It would be really common for blades to be rehilted, especially when you had a really high quality sword, a blade, like anything that would come from Toledo or Solingen in what is now Germany. It would be really common for the hilts to be removed and you would put new ones on. It was, especially in the early modern period, so roughly 16th into the 18th centuries, it became normal for a rapier or a side sword to be a part of a gentleman's dress if they were of a certain social class. And so you would want your sword to match your outfit, especially if you're going to something really fancy. And so if you were, especially you had enough wealth and means, you would want the hilt to match your especially fancy outfit. So there would be times where you would want to keep the blade and you would want to switch out the dressings that would go along with it, and we would put on a new hilt. Well, in the case of this beautiful piece in our collection, the hilt is actually older. We consulted one of the sort of OGs of studies of edged weapons, A. Norman, and an almost identical hilt about 80 years earlier, so from like the second quarter of the 16th century, is in a piece from the collection of the Musée de l'Armée in Paris. Almost identical, some characteristic features of the hilt that make it easy to match to ours. Shapes in the quillins here, the pommel nut is almost identical. That helps us kind of date the hilt on our piece to similar, and know that the hilt pieces are actually older than the blade itself. And also the wood here, this would have originally been wrapped, but it's kind of a special piece with this that we actually have the wood here that you can still see intact.
A little bit back.
Back.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, that's good.
And one of the other pieces about this that I want to call attention to is, and again, you're not going to be able to see this super well, but I want to talk a little bit about maker's marks. And in the rebated part of the blade here, where it's not sharp, And it's intentionally not sharp because the way these are designed, you would want to be able to slide your finger over for support. You can see a maker's mark. It's punched into the blade. Move it up. And these would be very common. So you would want to think of these as sort of like the tag in your clothes that has the brand. Well, in the case of edged weapons, and you would also see this on armor really commonly, for fine pieces, you would want to have evidence of how awesome your sword or your armor is. And so you would have that evidence in the form of this maker's mark. And so we oftentimes, the only evidence we have about the people who actually made these beautiful pieces, this it's both art and then also obviously very useful for stabbing people, is the maker's mark, because oftentimes the craftsmen themselves didn't leave any written records. And so what we have left are these maker's marks. And so we can see a lot about networks of exchange and trade from tracing where the pieces ended up. And there will sometimes be records in, they're called guardaroba in Italian, but they're basically inventories of what would be in a personal collection. And they will oftentimes reference things that are distinctive. So on this piece, several of the characteristics I mentioned with regard to identifiers on the piece, that it's dated, who made it, where it was made, and then things like the maker's mark. And that lets us, as scholars looking back, see where these pieces were moving all over Europe through the late medieval and the early modern period, and see that the reach of regular craftsmen who were in Spain, in the case of this sword blade, their wares were going all over Europe, and then also at this point reaching well into what is the Americas now. There's also crossed into Asia as well. So the reach of these trade networks was really global. So I'm pretty sure I'm getting close to my 5-minute time. I tend to ramble a little bit, so I'm gonna kind of wrap it up. But this is one of my favorite pieces, not only because of the details that come with the piece that help us be able to tell a lot of unique things about it, but also because of the way that it's a little bit odd. Oftentimes, like I mentioned, it was really common that we would have different hilts placed with the blade, but this is one that's kind of unique because the hilt is actually older. So it was placed on this blade at a later date, and there's lots of things that we can tell about the blade because of what's on it. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Oh yeah. I did want to chime in about this piece. That on the blade, the maker is listed as Alonso de Sahagún,
Yes.
which is a famous maker out of Toledo, a family of makers. And the date to this is actually after the elder retired, but Alonso de Sahagún the younger had started making blades at this point. And if you compare stylistically the lettering of this to similar pieces, this does not match the styling of the elder Sahagún, but it actually is pretty similar to that of the younger. But this is also a family that was so famous for their blade making that there were often knockoffs. So you see them in collections all over the world, and they were prolific, but not that prolific. It just ended up to being such a famous name that people would toss it onto their blades to try and increase the price or as a mark of quality.
Just like you can get plenty of counterfeit Gucci's, you would find plenty of counterfeit blades and armor or marks with famous makers' marks. And so there was a really good black market going, just like there is for knockoffs today.
And believe it or not, that is probably the best segue we're going to get to for Chris Poor.
Yeah. Chris, round 2.
Thank you, man.
I'm jumping back in because it's actually the maker's mark that's kind of the thing that ties these two very different swords together. So this is a hunting hanger with a staghorn grip, bronze parts. And I'm going to focus in, if you can, on the maker's mark. It's
Yeah,
crescent.
down and come back in.
You see that? Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, you have 3 strikes of a crescent moon,
Yeah, perfect.
and then on the reverse, you have the same punch as a single strike. This sword is basically from the English Civil War's first quarter of the 17th century. It's a back sword, so it has a straight, heavy back edge, a false edge. It's a straight cavalry sword, but you'll notice that got your focus.
Yep.
3 crescent moons and a single crescent moon. Now these two swords couldn't be more different. You have a long cavalry backsword with what's called a mortuary hilt, because often they had pictures of Charles I and Henrietta Maria. So this would be the kind of thing that a cavalryman would have used in the English Civil Wars. It's straight, fairly thick, multiple fullers. It's fairly light. It's a good slashing sword. It's long because you're using it off horseback. It has the original grip. You can see the wooden core with a copper alloy of some type of wire that's largely come unwound. That's because originally there would have been more strands, and if 1 or 2 of the strands break and come unwound, it leaves a gap. As you can see, this one's held together with screws, which was perfectly appropriate. Armorers invented screws. The hilt is heavily chiseled. The basic description isn't the most important thing, though. This one is a hunting sword. This one was used in England, hilted in England. This one came from a hunting lodge in Styria, which is South Austria. It's got a fairly interesting bronze or lateen hilt with little grotesque beasts. Again, a nice staghorn handle. And this would be the kind of a hanger you'd use hunting big game, deer or boar, as a side sword, but you could also use it as a light traveling sword. What I find really interesting about these two swords is, well, the provenance. This is part of the Oakeshott collection. So it's a nice example of an English Civil War sword. This one is one I bought from his usual source, Broke Museum Curators, completely unrelated to the Oakeshott collection. And in fact, it wasn't until we brought the collection here, several years after I first became acquainted with these swords, that I noticed that the maker's mark was identical. So what you have here is an example of 2 radically different blades made in a single workshop in probably Solingen. The crescent moon was a pretty popular Solingen mark. But another thing that's interesting is if, we'll put maybe a close-up, there's a flaw in this maker's mark. The moon has a little eye, and there's a little dot, or maybe it's a tear under the eye. Punches didn't last very long. In a commercial setting like this, when you're using a punch over and over and over, in just a few months, that punch is going to degrade. These marks are basically identical, which means that these 2 radically different blades were made within a fairly short period of time. And this just talks about the international commerce in blade trade. This blade was sent to England. This blade went south to southern Austria. So one shop, and like I do with Arms Armor, we ship all over the world. Well, this shop sent this blade to England. It sent this blade off to be fitted for some nobleman down in Styria. So very different swords, totally different use, one shop making a wide variety of products. So that's why I think these 2, although neither one is my favorite sword, they are really informative. So look at that. We learned something. And the coincidence, I mean, here it is 400 years later, and these 2 swords from radically different places in the world wind up here in this room. you know, because somebody was broke and I had some money.
Given
That's
the number
the-
of swords that you collect mathematically, it's not that.
Yeah, eventually.
Well, that just goes to show how poorly the museum world pays.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, that's it for those two. Thank you.
You wanna go or should
I
I?
think me next, and then indeed.
Okay. That's my sword.
This is where,
That's an infantry sword.
where did these?
It never got taken out.
Did the seven years?
No.
Is that the one that Brandon took today?
No. No, that was
Even for the knives?
The
1836.
1886.
Oh, okay, it's later on.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, the mortuary swords.
Have you seen the other?
What's that?
Have you seen the other? It's big and heavy.
We're looking all right?
Yeah, I'll frame you.
All right. Well, hello everyone. Alexander Greff, fellow at the Oakeshott Institute, and I'm going to be talking today about one of my favorite pieces, the 1796 model light cavalry saber. This one I find interesting in part because of the beautiful artistry of the blade itself, incredibly elegant curvature, the bluing on the blade itself, a number of decorative pieces that I'll go over in some detail, the original thong still attached to the end of the basket, or the end of the stirrup guard. And it's also one of my favorites in part because, unlike a lot of swords where we have to guess quite a bit at provenance, this one fits very clearly within a very specific lineage that related to John Gaspard Le Marchand, who was a British cavalry officer serving in Flanders in the 1790s and having some level of dissatisfaction with both the kit and the skill of cavalrymen with a blade in the British Army at the time, and looking at a number of Austrian dragoons and wanting to emulate their particular skill on the battlefield and their standard kit of a curved light cavalry saber. So this particular design itself has a rayskin grip, which I can maybe get a bit closer here.
Yeah, a little bit
Down a
down.
bit.
Yep.
So rayskin grip. This one is unique compared to a standard trooper saber. This is almost certainly an officer's saber based
Without a
on
doubt.
down a bit.
No, I just said without a doubt. Sorry.
Yeah, without a doubt, not a trooper saber. This one is significantly more expensive and more made to order specifically. You also have bluing all along the length, well, about halfway down the length of the blade in terms of, bit like that?
Yeah.
Specific sets of images including a number of royal insignia. And I'll see if I can get a good close-up here with the lights. Let me know how the focus is. Down at the base.
Yeah. That's
So,
right.
a good deal of classical and martial imagery drawn in this shield work. You have an example of a dragoon embossed on the blade itself. On the opposite side, similar classical imagery, shield, scale of justice, the Union flag, all representing a bit of the personal officer's touch, taking pride in their particular weapon. And then also here at the end, the thong that went around the wrist of the soldier wielding the sword with another leather ring at the end that could be used to cinch tight the strap around the wrist of the wielder.
I don't know the maker off the top of my head. We can check it in a minute. We'll check in between.
I think the only thing we can maybe say for certain is it's not J. Johnston of London because of the curved langlets. Those ones I know were always squared. Beyond that, I don't know if we have more about the maker's information.
Okay. Yeah, we can check it in a second as well.
Another noteworthy feature I'm just going to point out for a bit of the later discussion is the very thick backing on the false edge here, especially near the strong of the blade. And noteworthy for this particular saber compared to the earlier 1788, which was the first attempt at a model cavalry saber, heavy cavalry saber. There is a very thick edge to the blade going all the way out to the end. Not very much taper at all until you get to the very end. How's that?
Yeah, maybe just sit down. It's a big sword. Sorry.
So this one is also of interest to me because, as I said, it connects directly with a sword pedagogy tradition of the period. So Marchand was the original designer of this particular sword, also produced a set of 6 major cavalry exercises published in the same year as the model of the sword. And I think we might be able to put a link later into the description for a free version available online. But it was meant to be a standardization of cavalry exercising using a standardized weapon, so that there could be something of a scientific management approach to actually training British cavalry. Marchand was quite dedicated to a lot of these standardized training methods. He eventually went on to secure funding and become the first adjutant general of the Royal War College, which is still running today at Sandhurst in Britain. Was the first adjutant general of the school, and made a number of very particular points about specific features of the blade and how it should be utilized. He made, for example, multiple references, starting even in, I think, the very first paragraph of his textbook, that cutting from the shoulder and cutting from the wrist is always the intention when wielding a sword from horseback, never from the elbow. He spends several paragraphs all throughout the text reminding you to keep your elbows supple, just so that you can properly utilize the sword itself. And the cuts would, and this might be a little hard to do, but I'm going to attempt to show the positioning. Always, is that good?
Good enough.
Always attempting to be cut from the wrist or from the shoulder, which I'm not going to do because we don't have space, and this is a nice sword. Also making regular reference to features you wouldn't necessarily expect to be called out in manuals, like the wrist strap thong itself, which is meant to be held snugly but not so secure that it would disallow the movement of the hand along the grip. So keeping it light enough that you can move to different positions along the grip while remaining secure with the thong itself. Also, I mentioned the thick back edge before. The purpose of this was for any parries to be done from horseback. You were instructed, at least by Marchand, to keep your blade, and how's this angled, Dave?
Not too bad.
So as you're riding, keeping the blade angled very slightly downward and catching with the back edge any particular parries so as to not dull the edge of the blade itself. This also relates to a lot of period hearsay around the particular effectiveness, and some might say even brutality, of this particular weapon. There's one relatively apocryphal account from a soldier, George Farmer, who served in the Peninsular Campaign, whose memoirs a few of you might be familiar with, referencing a squadron of British dragoons using this particular model of saber, and spending most of the description just noting the degree to which an entire squadron of French cavalry were slaughtered by dragoons wielding this particular weapon in a relatively lethal, brutal, effective manner. Might be somewhat exaggerated. There was also a bit of hearsay about the French preferring to use thrusting with their cavalry sabers, and after the introduction of this particular weapon, the British preferring a lot of hacking cuts. Again, it's the prerogative of the historian to parse through how much is this really reflective of activities in the Peninsular Campaign, about the sort of scientific lethality of this designed weapon. But to me, it really is just very fascinating to be able to take a piece. And a lot of our favorite pieces in this collection don't really have a clear designer for them. We've got examples of maker's marks. We've got examples that point back to the architect of a lot of these designs. But this one to me is fascinating just because we can place it in a very specific context very specific originator, very specific intended usage, at least according to Marchand. And then just a little bit of the individual touch to the decorative design. So that's what makes the 1796 model saber one of my particular favorites. Relatedly, though, I'm going to hand it off to Dale because he has a number of other early modern Napoleonic era infantry and cavalry, or just infantry?
We'll see how much I want to talk.
Okay, we might let Dale talk for a little while, but more Napoleonic pieces to come.
Okay.
I have to bounce, but is there anything you need from me before I leave?
Yeah, that's a pretty good
I just found out. I just drooled.
Okay.
Cool.
So Dale might have over-prepared a bit for this.
It's
He's got a large stack of references that we might show off later through the
Yeah, we'll see.
description.
I don't know. I'll try and keep it short and sweet. So I cheated a bit, but I guess everybody cheated a little bit. You know, we were all basically told, like, you should pick your favorite sword in the Oakeshott collection, and then half of us picked 4 swords, half of which are not in the Oakeshott collection proper.
But they're still my favorite.
Exactly, it's still our favorite
I
swords.
follow directions.
And I am like a dog or a small child, and whatever's moving quickly or the shiny new thing is my latest favorite thing. So these are 2 relatively recent acquisitions of mine. So saber in particular is definitely my favorite weapon to practice, and being particularly big buff with respect to the Revolutionary Wars through the Napoleonic Wars and kind of immediately thereafter. I also collect, in particular, French weapons from the Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic period. So I have 2 French infantry officer sabers that I want to show off, and I kind of wanted to use them to demonstrate how things can be a bit misleading online when you just have pictures of swords, and how even with measurements, things that are superficially extremely similar end up actually in practice handling quite different. First, I wanted to give kind of an overview of these weapons, because this is a type of weapon that was fairly popular inside of the French army, but also outside of the French army, and one that people may not be as familiar with because, especially in the English-speaking world, we tend to be Anglophiles and know a lot more about the English swords. So you'll see these swords sometimes referred to as the 1800 model French infantry officer's sword. It's more of a family of swords. This is not a regulation sword. This is 30 years before the French introduced a regulation infantry officer's saber. And you will find a wide variety of stylistically and aesthetically similar hilts, but they end up actually varying wildly in both kind of size and details. So just on first glance, these seem almost identical, but once you start to look at them a little closer, you start to notice small things. First, I wanted to just give kind of some statistics about these, some measurements, and that should give you a better idea of the swords overall. So this one is, how long is this one? The blade length is 72.4 centimeters, and its overall weight is 719 grams. And if we look at the point of balance, it's probably 5 inches out from the guard. So it's actually fairly point heavy. We'll take a closer look at the the distal taper of the blade in a second, but it retains a fairly thick spine, and only tapers out towards like the last 6 inches or so. There's actually probably a reason for that we'll go into in a second. And then we have this one, which the blade is 71.1 centimeters long, so it's a centimeter shorter, but it's only 635 grams. So this is almost a full 100 grams lighter. The blade is a little bit thinner, but also the distal taper is much more pronounced. Starts out here and actually has much more complex fullering. It has this kind of secondary fuller that appears about 8 or 9 inches down the blade and continues down here until you get to this false edge. So if we actually look at the hilts themselves, this is one of the reasons that I purchased these, is they are so similar. This particular type of sword you will often see categorized by this form on the pommel. People call it, yeah, I'll bring it up close. In French, this is basically like a melon-formed pommel, because the ovoid shape and then these radiating cuts look a bit like slices of a melon, specifically like when you would slice a honeydew. So you've got this cap, and then you have the knuckle bow, and then just this equivalent on the back, and these ovoid langets that don't truncate in flat ends. So you see a lot of variation in the langets, as well as the decoration here on the knuckle bow. What particularly interested me about these two is that the decoration on the knuckle bows are quite similar to each other. But you'll notice that the weapon on the right has a pommel nut, and the one on the left doesn't. And if you look at the grips, the one on your right...
Too far.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. The one on your right is actually significantly longer. So this is definitely just a motif that's carried over and is not tightly regulated. Also, this particular style of hilt is not restricted to infantry sabers. So we actually see it fairly commonly in cavalry sabers as well, especially light cavalry sabers and for mounted officers, where the blades would actually end up being significantly longer. Let me grab all the rest of my notes. Another thing about these two swords, so let's go back to this one and why I thought that this might be this continual thickness out just until the very tip. If we take a close look at the blade, maybe if I turn it through the light, you can see that the fuller runs the entire length of the blade. It actually comes all the way out to the tip, which is super atypical of sabers of this type. It's much more common, almost universal, for the fuller to come out and then to end before kind of this yaman section of the blade. So, and Chris, you cued me into this when we first, I showed this to Chris, as this very well may have been, and probably was, a longer blade that was cut down. So, who knows? My personal theory, because I think it would be a cool theory, is that this was a cavalry saber that ended up getting cut down and turned into an infantry officer's saber. This sword is actually super cool because it has its scabbard. So we can see that it actually is fitted to the scabbard quite well. The sizing fits it perfectly. Also, the mouth of the scabbard has these 2 cutouts for the langets, and they fit it tightly. So this wasn't just a random scabbard. I don't think it was a random scabbard that was found and associated with the sword. All the dimensions are a little bit too convenient for that. And we're also extra special. We have the belt that went with it. So this is a type of belt that was fairly typical for an officer on foot. It's held tightly to the waist, and
I'm a really skinny person.
yeah, I mean, this could be tightened, but yeah, it's we have this S-shaped snake buckle, and we can see also where the button on the scabbard would have fit into this mouth and would have just been locked in place in the belt. So I'm particularly fond of this piece because we have all of those related pieces of equipment, and it's not just the sword itself. This sword, which is a little bit nicer, it's lighter, it feels a lot better to actually wield it. It also has this bluing and gilding present for kind of the top third of the blade. Was most likely a light infantry officer saber. So as some of you may know, the French army broke down their infantry loosely, this is an oversimplification, but into line infantry and light infantry, where you would have light infantry regiments which could serve the duty of a line infantry regiment, but often would serve more independent roles. They could be used for screening actions or scouting. Basically, things that required a little bit more skill and a little bit more independent thought. And one of the key features of the light infantry is that instead of having brass and gilt furniture and fittings on their uniforms and their weapons, they would have silvered. So this scabbard, and actually there's a trace on the hilt as well, you can see that there are still traces of silvering around some of the areas which have been better protected. It appears that at some point someone decided to clean this up and scrubbed it down, and we lost most of the silvering, which is a bit unfortunate, but there's still enough here for us to be able to at least speculate that this was a saber for a light infantry officer. You can actually find, they're much harder to find, but you can find images online of similar swords where the entire hilt itself is silvered, which is gorgeous. Definitely would be very bright in the sun, and I could see how when the utility of your saber might be just as much put it in the air and try and get someone to follow you as it is to actually go and fight someone with your sword.
That seems unusual, wouldn't it be, for a light infantry, effectively a skirmishing unit, to want something so gaudy?
I mean, it's that or the polished brass. So, like, it's... If we think about the uniforms of the French light infantry, they weren't the most subtle. This is not necessarily like the like German, or it's not like Jaeger units or like the King's German Legion, like their light infantry, where you're in green outfits with green plumes and black leathering. You are in your your French blue outfit, but instead of having white, everything is blue. Your trousers are blue. Your greatcoats are blue nominally. No uniforms are going to survive after probably your first encounter with the enemy.
So we have a question. Do you know about the maker location for any of these blades? And if not, is there any particular markings, any poinçons on the ricasso?
So, not for this one. So for this sword, which is one of the reasons why I think that maybe it was a blade that was not originally intended for an infantry officer's saber, is there's basically no maker's marks, and the steel is not as nice as this other saber. I'll try and bring it up close and see if we can see. There's modeling all along the blade, but there's an absence of anything along the spine indicating where the blade might have been made. And to my knowledge, it is not particularly common for hilts of this type to have proof marks of any kind. You might have decorations, so there might be chiseling, especially if you have a higher officer's blade. So if you had like a superior officer's blade with a hilt of this style, there are surviving examples that have chiseling down on the pommel, or especially the langets were particularly popular to decorate. Even if you're particularly lucky, you will find styles of this hilt where the langets end up getting decorated with the unit itself, which provides excellent evidence towards the provenance of the piece. You can't say for certain, but like it's pretty strongly, you can pretty safely assume that if it's got like your cornet, your hunting horn, and like 36 or something on there, then that was like the 36 light infantry.
We might have a complimentary piece that Chris has brought up for us.
It was just a folly. It's just a Napoleonic shako hat, so I didn't know, but it's got the cuirassier on the front, and
Oh yeah, that's nice.
I mean,
Come show the camera.
we don't know really much about it, except, it's from the Napoleonic Wars, showing how glitzy some things could be.
I did want to show, here, I'm going to put this down briefly, and kind of compare and contrast, just to give you a sense of the size. And I think this is something that we often don't think about, because so much of the saber systems that we study on foot are for later regulation sabers, and the blades tend to be fairly long, especially like the French regulation sabers towards the end of the 19th century. The blades get significantly longer than these. But we have an AN-11 light cavalry saber from the First Empire. So this one we do know a little bit more about. This was from Klingenthal and was made in 1813. I have not been able to, unfortunately, some of the inscription on the back has been rubbed off, but overall the blade is in quite good shape. I find this sword particularly interesting because it has not been service sharpened at all. The blade is still dull. And there's no evidence of use except for someone definitely dropped it and put a bend in the tip. It just makes me think of the Grande Armée coming back in 1812 and the makers in Klingenthal being like, well, shit. We need a lot more people on horses. There are not that many horses left in the country. There are not that many people who know how to ride horses left in the country. But we have some swords, and you just end up with a bunch of extra swords. Again, just like a personal pet theory that this ended up just stacked in a corner somewhere because you ended up with more swords than people to use them. But if we just compare the size of the blades, it's dramatic. And this is something that I have to think about when actually teaching saber, that since we're all buying our gymnasium sabers or whatever, they can vary wildly in their size and the style of fencing that we're doing. Some of the styles of fencing that we're doing are very specialized to a particular weapon, like Alex was talking about. You have Lamarchant's cavalry exercises, and he's like, here's the weapon, here's how to use it. And then you have a bunch of other systems, especially the French systems, where it's like, it's a sword and it might have a broad blade. And it might have a hilt like this, or it might have a hilt like this, or it might not have a hilt at all. You don't know, but here's a way to use it.
So I think it's an interesting market of period, too, that you have so much variety in terms of instruction around making of a sword or using of a sword.
Yeah, that there's like a more scientific approach to the swords, but also especially in France, you have this explosion of hilt types. Kind of at the end of the monarchy, there are like a large variety of different hilt types going into into the Revolutionary Wars, into the Consulate, right up into the First Empire. You end up with just like hundreds or thousands of different types of like unique hilts for sabers. And then everything starts to kind of like coalesce again and end up getting standardized. And like you still end up having some of that specialization, especially for like officers who have more money and more freedom to do that kind of thing. But you don't end up with stuff like this where your NCOs might actually have different hilts on their swords. This is just not as common.
I think it's a really interesting, I don't think it's reactionary per se, but for the French in particular with Denis Diderot and the Encyclopédie, the development of here is a standard for a sword and the standard for how you use it. And a lot of that, I mean, the Encyclopédie using specifically the plates from Angelo and showing the small sword as a very specific standard. I think in a minute here we'll get the chance to close out looking at a good example of a small sword.
So I did want to mention, I said that these were obviously fairly popular in France, both as infantry officer sabers as well as light cavalry. And by this type of sword, I'm particularly talking about the hilt, because as I've shown, like the blades might have had some loose regulation in terms of blade size, but not nearly to the same degree that you end up with once you get into the latter half of the 19th century. But also you see this type of hilt appear in the Americas, particularly in the U.S. So on the U.S. side in the War of 1812. So definitely there are depictions of these. If you go and look at Commodore Hazard Perry, Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, at the Battle of Lake Erie, where it was like relatively small scale fleet engagement compared to especially what was actually happening in the Napoleonic Wars. You ended up, the U.S. had like 5 schooners and 3 brigs or something, and the British had a fleet of, I want to say, like 9 vessels, and the U.S. ended up taking the whole fleet and ended up securing kind of the U.S. presence on Lake Erie for the rest of the war. But there is a particular painting of Perry where he's actually, I think it's Perry, where he's drawing his sword backwards, like he's showing it like this, and it's not obvious right away. It looks like it's still in its scabbard if you don't look too closely, but actually it's this bluing and gilding, and it cuts off right at the exact same spot. So you can see the rest of the white metal of the blade down here, and he's just pulling it out like this, and it has an almost Like, again, stylistically, extremely similar hilt. And I could see how you would maybe want to use a weapon like this, this in particular, this blade size, on a naval vessel. When you don't have a whole lot of room, especially if these are small vessels, these are not ships of the line, this would be great. This allows me to keep it very close to my body. This allows me to do very tight cutting actions while still having access to a nice point. And it's hard to describe if you haven't held one of these before. The curve of this pommel fits really well into the pinky and ring finger.
Can you bring it a little closer with your fingers just up?
Sure. So this one in particular, with the slightly larger grip, fits quite nicely, especially holding it out. It falls very gently into the hand, and you would think that the ridge of this melon shape would end up actually inhibiting, you would think it would be annoying, but it actually fits perfectly right onto the meat of the bottom of the palm. So stylistically as a sword, one of my favorites. I'm really glad that I have two of them.
Greedy.
So far, I have two so far. Yeah, and I think that's everything I have about these swords.
Okay.
I think. I could maybe talk more.
We will come back for more streams in future
Yeah,
months,
yeah,
so
we
if
can-
we
we
have
can-
updates.
Yeah, we can go real deep into Napoleonic swords at some point.
more, we'll be back.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to hand it off to Chris then to bring us
One
home.
last piece?
Yeah,
Sure.
one last piece. Also, a reminder to the chat, if you have any additional questions about any of the pieces, please throw them in chat. We will do our best to answer.
Well, this one is sort of a last minute addition. I'll show up close because this is, like Dale's, this is the whole shooting match. It's a small sword, which basically in the 18th century, if you weren't military, pretty much the small sword was the sword. So as you can see, it's very narrow, but it has a very strong forte, and this is called a Kalishamar blade. It's very thick at the top, very thin below, very rigid, almost completely stiff. Highly elaborate hilt, gilded, chiseled. As you can see, both on the outer surface and the inner surface. This is a piece of jewelry, but it's also completely lethal. The blade is heavily engraved. Probably some engraving as opposed to just acid etching. The grip is very complex. Again, with gilding and silver. So it's a gold and silver and steel. So this would have been the prototype of the type of sword that Brandon's dueling small swords were. This is what basically the more elaborate version would have been. We also have the scabbard, which is incredibly thin wood covered with incredibly thin leather. You can see inside. But also this one's unusual because it has the gilded mounts, which exactly match the hilt, including the little shape. And you can see this is about the size of a pencil. And it's just paper thin wood covered with this parchment. So a survival like this is very unusual. But also you can see the way these were worn. People tended to wear a broad sash. So this would actually clip onto your waistband. As you can see, it's very clever. It's got these little spring clips that are basically the same as a modern spring clip. So to have the entire thing is very unusual. The sword itself is basically weightless. This probably weighs about 10 ounces, a little less. But as you see the thickness of the profile, that's nearly 3/8 of an inch thick. Now, it's heavily hollow ground on the back, and it's heavily hollow ground there, so it's very rigid. But a sword like this would be incredibly fast, and just, you wouldn't even, let me speak from personal experience. When you accidentally stab your friend with one of these, you aren't even aware that you put it through his arm. And neither was he until it came out. They are so needle pointed, there is zero resistance when you stab the human body. And like I say, it's nothing I recommend trying, but having experienced it, I thought I might pass on that it's all too easy to happen, and you literally don't know you've done it. I'm not addressing the schools of fence for this because they were highly formalized, and every gentleman was expected to study it. But I really wanted to show this just because it shows the breadth of the collection. We basically go from more or less the middle of the 15th century BC to the end of the 19th century. So it's a broad range of things that is available for study. So thank you to all of our members who spoke. Everyone here is a dedicated, educated, amateur volunteer. So we all,
I think we'll maybe get everyone on camera just to
yeah,
say goodbye.
we all do this because we love swords and we love talking about swords. And so if you're out there and you love swords and want to find out a little more about it, give us a contact. And we're open to any range of study you're interested in. Think of this as a resource. And hey, there it is. Hey, I guess Merry Christmas, huh? Happy holidays. Thank
Thanks
you.
for tuning in.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Swordfully yours.
And of course, if you have questions, we'll stay and answer them.
Yeah, yeah, we'll stay on
We
it
can
for a
hang
couple
out
more
for a
minutes.
little bit.
Yeah, I'll start putting things away. But we can hang out with the camera.
Good job, everybody.
God, I hate that audience.
Did you mute this?
No.
When did you get these?
And I understand Dale's buying pizza.
Oh yeah. For myself.
For myself.
So like over the past.
Yeah, I was like, I remember you talking about them, but I hadn't seen them yet.
And those are they're talking about the.
Yeah, I was like,
Report called the spine here. You see, there's a lot of crap that should be able to clean up and tell where.
yeah. It's interesting
Like-
that, like, how much clearer
Yeah.
the stamping is on one
To
side than the
mute the
other.
mic.
Oh, yep, yep.